As we begin looking more closely at Buddhist art, we're going to return to India. In an earlier lecture, I talked about the Axial Age. A number of religions were born in the centuries just before and after the turn of the millennium, at a time when traditional society was in some ways being transformed or even breaking down. In northwest India, at the time of the Buddha's death in the 6th century BCE, increasingly powerful kingdoms were accumulating wealth and power, and society was increasingly stratified along economic and caste lines. The lives of ordinary people came under more strain, and the traditional religion was not seen as meeting their needs. One response among traditional Hindu Brahmins was solitary asceticism. Men seeking spiritual enlightenment and escape from samsara took up a life living alone as hermits in the woods. Another response was adopted by shramanas, or groups of wandering beggars who lived together in the forest with no caste differences as a spiritual community. After leaving his comfortable life as a young prince, and after exploring solitary asceticism, Siddhartha Gautama joined a Shramana group and transformed it by preaching a middle way that neither rejected nor embraced the desires of the body. Instead, the Buddha preached transcending suffering through wisdom, ethical conduct, including nonviolence, and the mindfulness that comes from meditation, self-discipline, and the performance of good deeds. The sum of these teachings was Dharma, or the law, usually represented as a wheel. The Dharma chakra, or circle of Dharma, is probably the best known symbol of Buddhism, and it shows up repeatedly in Buddhist iconography. The Dharma chakra is associated with one of the many mudras, or symbolic hand gestures. Here you see a Buddha statue illustrating the Dharma chakra mudra associated with Buddha's first sermon. And here are a few more famous mudras. The Enlightenment Witness mudra shows Buddha pointing to the earth, and this represents the moment of the Buddha's enlightenment. We didn't, alas, have time for a longer version of the Buddha's biography, so here's a good part that we left out. When the demon Mara attacked Siddhartha with armies of monsters, the demon asked the about-to-be Buddha, "Where are your witnesses?" Siddhartha reached out his right hand to touch the earth, and the earth itself roared, "I bear you witness." Mara disappeared, and at that moment Siddhartha realized enlightenment and became a Buddha. The No Fear mudra conveys protection and security, and it's popular for Buddha images placed in the home. Where else have you seen it? One of Shiva's four hands is raised in this mudra. Just as Christianity would receive a big boost from the conversion of Emperor Constantine, stay tuned, Buddhism began to spread dramatically when the great Mauryan ruler, King Ashoka, converted to Buddhism after being filled with sorrow and horror when he saw the death and suffering that one of his own military victories had caused. He drew up a new legal code based on the Dharma and inscribed these laws on stone columns placed throughout his empire. This capital was placed at Sarnath, where the Buddha first preached about Dharma. Note that the lions stand on a Dharma chakra, or wheel of the law. The four lions represent the four corners of the world, but they also, as is so often the case, represent Ashoka's power and majesty. Ashoka founded a number of important monasteries, and one of the greatest was at Sanchi in central India. The monetary complex included a number of buildings, but the most famous is the Great Stupa. While stupas were probably modeled on earlier South Asian burial mounds, they are not tombs but reliquaries, built to house bits of the Buddha's body collected after his cremation. When the Buddha died, his remains were first collected in 8 reliquaries, but Ashoka recollected them and sent relics to thousands of stupas all around his kingdom, and these all became important pilgrimage sites. The Buddha's ashes were thought to have spiritual power, so by visiting and worshiping these relics, Buddhists would participate in the Buddha's enlightenment. So let's watch a clip from an Asian Art Museum video on South Asian Buddhist art. As you watch the video, pay special attention to how the Buddha is represented at Sanchi. That's going to change. The circular building is, of course, the stupa, but this plan gives you a better sense of how it belonged to a larger complex, including other stupas and numerous monastery buildings. So this plan is a required College Board image, but the College Board does not have these helpful labels. First, Note that the stupa does not have a Pantheon-style open dome, that circle notwithstanding. The dome is completely filled with earth and, of course, with relics. The main body of the stupa, the dome or anda, represents the world mountain, which rises through the center of the Buddhist universe. We've seen that before in Hindu architecture. The yasti, which rises through the top of the anda, symbolizes the axis mundi, the point at the center of the universe that connects heaven and earth. Some traditions of Buddhism also hold that it represents the Bodhi tree, under which the Buddha found enlightenment. The 3 stone discs on the yasti represent the 3 jewels of Buddhism: the Buddha himself, Siddhartha, the Dharma, the law, and the Sangha, or monastic community, based on those earlier communities of wandering beggars. The yasti is surrounded by a small fence called the harmika. In Buddhist tradition, fences are used to gate off sacred areas. Remember how exclusivity is one of the features of a sacred space? These multi-level fences accentuate the separateness of the sacred space from regular worldly concerns. Past the gate, one enters sanctified space. The part of the stupa surrounded by the harmika is a square area that represents the domain of the gods. Finally, there are 4 gateways leading into the stupa called toranas, which are aligned with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. The stupas were likewise the site of a ritual. Buddhists venerate the Buddha's remains through the ceremony of circumnavigation, walking around the stupa in a clockwise direction, following the path of the sun and creating harmony with the cosmos. The procession is also a communal act of worship. It's interesting to compare this with the spiritual journey of early Christian pilgrims. The movement was linear, from narthex to apse, terms you're going to encounter soon, marking the movement from sin to salvation. By contrast, the Buddhist journey is circular, symbolizing the cycle of regeneration and the quest for nirvana, as well as a Buddhist belief that a circle represents perfection. But Christian pilgrimage churches also contained relics and built ambulatories so that pilgrims could more easily gain access to these relics. Stay tuned. The gateways open to the 4 cardinal directions from which the spiritual energy flows through the world. The gateway to the stupa is covered with friezes that depict stories from the Buddha's life and also from his past lives. The Buddha is represented by symbols: the lotus, the wheel, a riderless horse, an umbrella held above a throne, footprints, and tritanas, or 3 jewels, which again symbolize the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. As you saw on the video, one of the carved figures on the Torana is a Yakshi, an Indian goddess who represented fertility and agriculture. Buddhists reinvented her to represent the Buddha's mother, Mara. Again, we see Hinduism reinterpreted, but also the way in which Hinduism and Buddhism coexisted in India and sometimes merged. The woman and tree motif carried an added dimension of meaning due to a widely prevalent belief that by her very touch, a woman could cause a tree to blossom or bear fruit. Again, notice how deeply both Hinduism and Buddhism revere the creative power of women. We'll see similar themes arise powerfully in Christianity with the veneration of Mary. Also note the comfort with sensuality in Indian religious art, both Buddhist and Hindu. Buddhism, like Hinduism, regarded sexuality and spirituality as variant forms of a single fundamental cosmic force. And this is a contrast with Christianity, which especially in the Middle Ages was associated with a distrust of sensuality and a preference for monastic celibacy. Of course, Buddhism and Hinduism also have strong traditions of celibacy. And now finally we move to images of the Buddha, which is probably what most of you think of when you think of Buddhist art. First, watch this introduction to Indian images of the Buddha. Images of the Buddha himself did not appear for at least 400 years after his death, but as the video indicated, the demand for devotional objects eventually overwhelmed the aniconic impulse. This is the meditating Buddha. It is not a required work, but I will use it to introduce some of the iconography of Buddhist representation and the culture that produced our next required image, the Buddhas of Bamiyan. Gandhara was part of the Kushan Empire. It was located near overland trade routes and links to the ports on the Arabian Sea, and consequently, its art incorporated Indian, Persian, and Greco-Roman styles brought to Central Asia by Alexander the Great. And you can really see the Greek stylistic influence in the facial features, curly hair, and classical style costumes. Images of the Buddha and Bodhisattvas from Gandhara somewhat resemble sculptures of Apollo, Athena, and other Greco-Roman gods. Buddhist sculptural drapery, however, tends to be more symmetrical and regular, keeping with the serenity of the Buddha. And the slide also shows some of the Buddhist characteristic iconography. The halo is common in depictions of the Buddha. Sometimes it's shown as a circle of light, sometimes as a flame, mandorla. The Ushnisha, or top knot, symbolizes his role as a spiritual guide for his followers. The urna is a third eye, symbolizing the Buddha's ability to see into the divine world. And the mudra, or hand gesture, of this Buddha is the meditation gesture. And now you see why I showed you another Gandharan image of the Buddha before we arrived at our required work. And our required work, alas, is gone. So let's watch a very short excerpt from a National Geographic video on the lost treasures of Afghanistan. It includes some footage of the Buddhas before they were destroyed. And here's a closer look at the colossal Buddha before its destruction. The smaller of the two destroyed Buddhas on the left is the Sakyamuni Buddha, or the historical Buddha, Siddhartha. By this point in Buddhist history, Buddhists were worshiping a wide range of manifestations of the Buddha, including the Buddha from his earlier lives and the Vairocana, or cosmic Buddha, the universal Buddha from whom all Buddhas emanate. We will see another image of the Vairocana Buddha when we move east to China and then again in Japan. The main bodies were hewn directly from the sandstone cliffs, but details were modeled in mud mixed with straw coated with stucco. This coating, has almost practically all of which wore away even before these were blown up, was painted to enhance the expression of the faces, hands, and folds of the robes. The statues had a troubled history even before the Taliban came along. Genghis Khan largely destroyed Bamiyan in 1221, but he spared the statues. A Persian emperor tried to blast them with cannon in the 1800s, and the face was taken off by an Afghan king during a rebellion. As this history suggests, motives for the attack have been twofold. On the one hand, Islam rejects images, and this is now an entirely Muslim region. But the Buddhas also came to represent the beauty, wealth, and political power of the Bamiyan Valley. Rulers attacking the valley were attacking its most iconic images as well. So you've seen this map before in my first lecture, and in my last lecture you learned that Buddhism spread as far east and west as the Khmer Empire. In my final lectures on Buddhism, I will talk about its spread east, I will talk about its spread east into China, Tibet, and Japan. To finish up today, let's head even further south and east to Indonesia and the spectacular temple of Borobudur. Southeast Asia, together with Sri Lanka and Tibet, is today the most Buddhist region in the world. The huge island nation circled in green is Indonesia, and today it's a majority Muslim country, the most populous Muslim country in the world. Borobudur is located on the island of Java, shown here. Java was another place where cultures came together. Most of the Javanese were devotees of the Hindu god Shiva, but they were also Buddhists. Like the Khmer, they deified their kings, identifying them as bodhisattvas, or divine beings who chose not to enter nirvana, but instead to stay behind to assist people on their path to enlightenment. I'm going to talk more about that in my final Buddhism lectures. One opportunity for spiritual growth was to support the king in construction of temples. In this way, the citizenry could earn religious merit and, one suspects, political favor as well. Meanwhile, the kings demonstrated their piety and gained favor with the gods by erecting these monuments. The rulers of central Java's Sailendra Buddhist dynasty manifested the concept of the god-king on a very grand scale. During their rule, they constructed many major religious monuments, and the most famous of which is Borobudur. Consisting of 1.3 million stone blocks, it was carved and constructed by 50,000 Javanese over a 50-year period. It's 115 feet tall and sits atop a 403-foot square, making it the largest Buddhist stupa in the world. And to augment this grandeur, the monument is set on a small plateau that rises 40 feet above the plain. So we see still another sacred mountain. This aerial view is one of the 3 required images of Borobudur. Let's introduce ourselves to the site with another UNESCO video. Hindu temples were meant to house the gods. Borobudur, by contrast, was not just meant as a memorial or shrine of the gods, but far more as an architectural representation of Buddhist philosophy. The diagram illustrates the worldview mapped in the temple, and that you just heard described in the video. Borobudur, like Angkor Wat, represents Mount Meru, the center of the Buddhist and Hindu universes. Borobudur is the ultimate diagram of the Buddhist cosmos. Moving around it and ascending to its summit, pilgrims can relive their own previous lives and those of the Buddha, and they can anticipate their future. They ascend from the human sphere of desire to the philosophical sphere of form, and finally arrive at the uppermost stupas, the sphere of formlessness, which symbolizes Buddha's ultimate achievement in nirvana, his escape from samsara. The base and first 5 levels, which are rectangular, represent the terrestrial world. Reliefs on the ground level of the stupa illustrate the plight of mankind as we move through endless cycles of birth, death, and reincarnation. The walls of the next 4 tiers show scenes from the life of the Buddha. The 3 round uppermost levels of the structure represent the celestial realm and support 72 stupas. Each of the stupas originally contained a statue of the preaching Buddha seated in a yoga position, and they surround the largest uppermost stupa. In the physical act of following galleries clockwise around the monument, the devotees follow in the Buddha's footsteps. They also emerge from darkness into light, in contrast to some temples, where worshippers delve even deeper into a cave-like structure toward a dark inner sanctuary. The Buddhas in the niches of the 5th balustrade level, 64 in all, represent the Vairocana or cosmic Buddha, and all form the same teaching Dharmachakra mudra. So here's just one of the carved narrative friezes that an ascending pilgrim would see, but it's the one the College Board picked out. It recounts the circumstances of the historical Buddha's birth. Queen Mara had a dream that an elephant had entered her womb, really the Buddha in the shape of an elephant. During her pregnancy, the queen acquired certain powers, such as the power to heal diseases. Queen Mara asked the king to be allowed to give birth in the Lumbini pleasure garden. The queen set out for the garden in a carriage. That's the scene captured in this frieze. When she arrived, she walked until she came to an Ashoka tree, which magically bent down for her. She grasped the limb, and the Buddha emerged from her right side. Note the parasols. Again, they're a symbol of royalty. Borobudur was hidden for centuries under layers of volcanic ash and jungle growth. It was rediscovered in 1885 by employees of the Dutch East India Company, who partly reconstructed it, and then UNESCO, the UN's cultural organization, undertook a major reconstruction in the 1970s. At that time, Borobudur was designated a World Historical Site. Buddhist worship has returned to this temple. Once a year during the full moon in May or June, Buddhists in Indonesia observe Vesak, commemorating the birth, death, and the time when Siddhartha Gautama attained the highest wisdom to become the Buddha Shakyamuni. Although about 90% of Indonesians are now Muslim, Vesak is a national holiday in Indonesia. And now we will finish up our all too quick survey of Buddhist art with a trip to China, Tibet, and finally Japan.